The stories. This hospital wing is a secret trap. Larkin Pruitt learned that phrase from a guard who would not step past the double doors, not even for overtime pay. The wing sat dark on the fourth floor, and people swore it was built to catch the wrong person. He was 34 years old and worked as a biomedical equipment tech at a regional hospital near a river town. That morning, he just wanted to swap old heart monitors, label cables, and go home before his shift ran long. The renovation schedule said the wing was closed, which meant no patients and fewer interruptions for once. The charge nurse handed him a clipboard and pointed at the service elevator with a tired look. "Fourth floor, east wing, and do not get cute with those doors," she said, keeping her voice low. Larkin asked what she meant, and she shook her head like she hated the story. "They lock weird, and that place eats radios," she said, then walked away before he could ask more. Security met him at the elevator with a plastic bin of temporary badges and 2 flashlights. The guard was named Terrence Hale, late 50s, and he moved like his knees hurt every step. Terrence scanned Larkin in, then stopped at the threshold and did not cross it. "If you hear the overhead chime, you walk back out," Terrence said, watching the ceiling instead of Larkin. Larkin tried to laugh, but it came out flat and unsure. He said he was not hunting ghosts, he was swapping monitors and checking batteries. Terrence nodded like he had heard that line too many times before. "Sure," Terrence said, then pointed to the stairwell door behind them. "That is your exit. Remember it." The east wing smelled like old disinfectant and dusty drywall, with a colder air that felt deliberate. Work lights hung from cords, but only 2 of them worked, and they threw long shadows. The hallway signs still named departments that no longer existed, like respiratory overflow and recovery annex. Larkin kept moving, because standing still made the quiet feel heavier than it should. He reached the supply alcove, where the monitors were stacked in a neat row, ready for removal. Each unit had a tag with a date, and the oldest one read 1997 in faded ink. He took out his phone to snap photos for his work log, then noticed his signal was gone. That fit what Terrence said, and it still made Larkin uneasy in a way he could not name. He started on the first monitor and kept his tools close, because he did not like the echo. Metal clicks bounced down the hall, then came back softer, like someone else was repeating them. He told himself it was just the building, just the empty rooms and the tile floors. Then the overhead speaker crackled, and a single tone chirped like a call bell clearing its throat. The sound lasted 2 seconds, then the speaker went quiet again. Larkin froze with a screwdriver in his hand, listening hard for anything that followed. Nothing happened, so he exhaled and forced himself to keep working. That was when the double doors behind him swung inward and shut with a heavy final thud. He turned and walked back fast, because he did not like the timing at all. The doors had no handle on his side, just a smooth plate and a narrow seam. He pushed anyway and felt the panel give a little, then lock solid like it hit a deadbolt. He called out Terrence's name, but his voice died in the hallway like the air swallowed it. Larkin stepped back and tried the crash bar on the nearby stairwell door. The bar did not move, and the red alarm light above it did not blink. He pulled his badge and waved it at the reader, and the reader stayed dark. That was the moment the phrase made sense, and his stomach tightened with a cold rush. He walked to the closest nurse station and found an old desk with a dead computer monitor. A dusty phone sat on the counter, and its receiver cord was cut cleanly. On the wall behind it, a laminated map showed routes marked with arrows and thick lines. Someone had written in pen across the bottom, "Do not use east exit during isolation." Larkin had heard stories about isolation wings during outbreaks, but this felt older than that. He followed the map, moving slow and checking each intersection for an open stairwell. Every door he tried was locked, and the badge readers were either blank or missing. The only thing that worked was the overhead speaker, which clicked again and gave one more chirp. He stopped near room 418 because the door was cracked open a few inches. Inside was a stripped patient room with an empty bed frame and a cracked plastic chair. The window blinds were half down, and the light from outside made the room look underwater. On the floor near the wall, a thin line of dust was disturbed, like something had been dragged recently. Larkin crouched and looked closer, and he saw scuff marks leading to the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed, but the handle was intact and it opened with a soft squeal. There was nothing inside except an old vent grate and a faint smell of damp drywall. Then he noticed the grate screws were new, shiny against the rust around them. He could have ignored it, but his instincts would not let him. He grabbed the grate and pulled, and it popped free like someone wanted it removed fast. Behind it was a narrow space, not a normal duct, more like a hidden passage between walls. A second vent cover sat a few feet in, and beyond that, he saw a faint glow. Larkin took out his flashlight and aimed it into the gap, then heard a low whir of a fan. The glow came from a small work light set on the floor, and it was still warm. Someone had been there, and not a long time ago. His skin prickled and he backed away, because he did not have any business crawling into a wall. He returned to the hallway and tried to call again, but his phone still showed no service. He turned on airplane mode and off again, then tried anyway, and it failed like before. He opened his work bag and found a small handheld tester with a recording function for troubleshooting. It was not meant for this, but it was better than nothing. So he pressed record and spoke clearly. He said his name, his job, the date, and that he was locked inside the East Wing. He described the speaker tones, the door shut, and the vent gap with a warm light inside. He did it the way he filed incident reports, calm and factual, even though his hands shook. When he finished, he clipped the tester to his belt like a tiny witness. Larkin walked back to the double doors and pounded 3 times, then waited. No footsteps came, no reply, and the air felt colder near the doors, like the building was breathing. He looked up and saw a small camera dome in the corner, its lens facing down the hall. The tiny green light on it was off, which meant it might not be recording at all. He remembered the map and the note about isolation, and he started thinking like a tech again. If this wing was built for quarantine, it could have negative pressure, sealed doors, and remote locks. That could explain the weird air and the dead signals if the walls were reinforced. It could also explain why Terrence would not cross the threshold, because nobody wanted to be locked inside. He needed a control panel, something that ran the doors and the fans. He followed the hall until he found a metal door marked with faded letters, facilities only. It was locked, but the hinge side had a gap where the frame did not meet right. He slid his flashlight beam along it and saw the corner of a keypad inside. He tried the door again and felt it flex, like the latch was old and tired. He took a flat tool from his kit and worked it into the gap carefully, pushing in small increments. After a minute, the latch slipped, and the door opened with a groan that echoed too far. Inside was a cramped room full of conduit, breaker boxes, and a panel with tiny labeled switches. The panel had a sticker that read, "Isolation System, installed 1999. Below it sat a thin binder in a cracked plastic sleeve, full of maintenance notes. Larkin flipped through and saw repeated entries about door faults, speaker tests, and lock cycling. One note was underlined twice and dated 2008, and it said, "Do not enable autoseal without supervisor." He kept turning pages and found an incident entry that made him stop breathing for a second. It said a contractor got trapped after a test, and dispatch logs showed a delayed response. The note used careful language, but it ended with, "Injury reported, claim filed." Larkin had never heard about any of that, and he worked here for years. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the binder pages, then remembered there was no service. He took them anyway, because proof mattered later, even if he could not send it now. He scanned the panel and found a switch labeled Seal Enable, and it was in the on position. Next to it was a smaller switch labeled Override Release, and it was covered with a taped plastic guard. The tape looked fresh, and the guard had tiny scratches like it had been forced back recently. Larkin peeled the tape carefully and lifted the guard, then flipped the override release down. A low alarm tone sounded, not loud, but sharp, and the fans slowed like they were winding down. Down the hall, he heard the double doors clunk like bolts retracting inside the frame. He ran back to the threshold and pushed, and this time the doors moved with stiff resistance. They opened just enough for him to squeeze through, and cool normal air hit his face. He did not feel relief yet, because the hallway behind him was still dark and still wrong. He stepped out fully, and the doors shut again behind him with a softer close. Terrence was gone from the security desk, and the service elevator stood open and empty. Larkin jogged to the main corridor and finally saw a nurse, then another, then a doctor. He waved them down and tried to explain, but his voice came out too fast. A supervisor told him to sit, drink water, and wait for security, and Larkin did not argue. Within minutes, a different guard arrived, younger, and his radio worked fine in the main hall. Larkin told him everything, and he handed over the recording from the tester without hesitation. He also showed the photos on his phone, even though they were just images in a dead zone. The guard frowned and said the East Wing should be sealed only during drills, and nobody scheduled any drills. Later that afternoon, the hospital risk manager pulled Larkin into a small conference room. She was named Maris Holt, early 40s, and she spoke like someone used to bad news. She asked him to repeat the timeline, then asked if he touched anything inside the wing. Larkin said he opened a facility's door and flipped an override, because he was trapped and had no other choice. Maris stared for a long moment, then nodded slowly like she had expected that answer. She said the isolation system was supposed to be decommissioned years ago, but the project never finished. She did not explain why, and she did not have to, because her eyes gave it away. Some parts of the hospital were left behind on paper, but still alive in the walls. The next day, Larkin came back with permission to gather his tools and finish his work. This time, 2 guards went with him, and one of them carried a portable repeater for radio signal. They logged every door, every switch, and every camera dome they could find. The repeater worked until they crossed the threshold. Then the signal died again like it hit a curtain. They followed Larkin to the facilities room, and the seal enable switch was on again. Maris was not there, but a facilities supervisor was, and his face went tight when he saw it. He said nobody on his team touched that panel, and he sounded scared saying it. The younger guard took photos and called for a detective from the city, because now it was not a glitch. The detective arrived with a notebook and a calm voice, and she asked for every record they had. She requested keycard logs for the service elevator, maintenance entries, and any camera footage near the 4th floor. She used careful phrases like reportedly and consistent with, as if she knew the hospital would fight itself. Larkin watched her write, and he felt a sick pride that his recording might matter. The keycard logs showed an odd detail. One badge had accessed the service elevator at dawn that day. The badge belonged to a contract cleaner, but witness statements said the cleaner never showed up. The hospital said badges were sometimes shared, which was a problem all by itself. The detective asked who had custody of spare badges, and security went quiet. They pulled older records too, because the binder note about 2008 would not leave Larkin's mind. Dispatch logs from that year showed a call from the East Wing, then a second call, then a response delay. The narrative report used soft language about confusion and locked doors, but the pattern felt familiar. Maris admitted the injury claim existed, and she said it was settled quietly to avoid panic. Then the detective found something that connected the vent gap to the locks in a way nobody liked. A building plan from archived facilities files showed a service crawl behind room 418. It linked to a small corridor that led toward the pharmacy level, not wide enough for comfort. The plan labeled it as a contamination bypass, built so supplies could move during isolation. On paper, it made sense, but the fresh screws and warm work light meant it was being used now. They sent a small camera probe into the gap, and its final footage showed drag marks and boot prints. Near the far end, the camera caught a plastic tote wedged behind a pipe, still sealed. Inside the tote were dozens of pre-packed syringe kits, the kind tracked tightly by the pharmacy. That discovery changed the tone of the whole investigation, because now there was a motive. Someone was using the old bypass to steal controlled supplies without crossing monitored hallways. The lock trap was not superstition. It was a tool, and it kept witnesses out of the way. If a tech got stuck inside, the thief could work the bypass with less risk of being seen. The twist came when they matched the Dawn badge swipe to a second system log. The isolation panel recorded every time the seal enable switch changed position. It showed the switch was turned on 2 minutes after the badge swipe, then turned off later. That meant the person who entered wanted the wing sealed, and they knew exactly where the panel was. They checked cameras outside the threshold because those still worked, and one angle finally gave a face. The figure wore scrubs under a jacket and kept their head down, but the gait was distinct. A nurse manager recognized the walk and the shoes, and she said it matched a long-time supply runner. The hospital could not accuse anyone publicly, but the detective did not need public accusations. A week later, the detective returned with a warrant and took a specific employee into custody off-site. The public statement said an internal theft ring was under investigation, and details were limited. Mara sent a short email to staff saying the East Wing was sealed permanently pending safety upgrades. No one wrote the words secret trap in that email, but everybody understood the message anyway. Larkin finished replacing the monitors in a different unit, and he refused any job that required the East Wing. He kept the tester recording backed up at home because he did not trust systems that went dark. Sometimes he still thought about that chirp from the overhead speaker, small and polite and wrong. It sounded like a warning or a signal, and he believed it had saved him by making him move. Months later, after the panel was removed and the bypass was filled, Terrence finally told Larkin one more thing. He said the wing was built to protect the rest of the hospital, and it did when used right. He said the danger came when someone decided protection could also be a cage. Larkin nodded and looked at the plain wall where the double doors used to be, and felt quiet relief. The stories. Locals warned about this abandoned cabin for years. The cabin sat back in the pines, and locals kept warning newcomers to stay away from it. Those warnings sounded like small-town drama until a maintenance worker found fresh boot prints in the dust. Kellen Brody was 36 and worked for the county parks department as a trails and facilities technician. On a cool weekday in early fall, he planned to swap a rotted signpost near a service road. The task was simple: drive out, set the post, snap a photo for records, then head back. He had done the same loop dozens of times, and he expected a quiet morning again. The service road cut through dense trees, and the radio lost signal not far from the highway. Kellen parked near a locked gate, then carried tools and a new sign down the old spur. Half a mile in, the trees opened around a clearing that should have been empty and flat. Instead, a cabin sat there, weathered boards and a sagging roof like it had been dropped from another decade. The cabin was not on his route sheet, and it was not in the park asset list either. Kellen had heard of it because people complained about trespassers and late-night fires near the clearing. A clerk at the front desk had once rolled her eyes and called it the cabin story again. Kellen never cared because his job was signs, gates, and broken benches, not local legends. He set the new signpost first, then took a quick photo with his work phone for the file. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw something that pulled him off his schedule. A line of boot prints crossed the clearing, dark and crisp in pale dirt, heading straight to the front steps. The prints looked fresh, and the last rain had been 2 days earlier. Kellen told himself it could be hikers, but the cabin sat outside any marked trail network. He walked closer, scanning for trash, smoke, or anything that could start a brush fire. At the base of the steps, he noticed a second set of prints that ended and did not return. The ground was soft enough to hold detail, yet there was no matching path back to the tree line. The front door hung slightly open, and the gap looked too clean for a place that abandoned. Kellen stopped on the bottom step, then called out with the polite voice of a worker in public space. He said, "County maintenance, anybody in there?" No one answered, and the cabin gave back only a dull creak from settling wood. He should have backed out and called a ranger, yet the missing return prints felt wrong. Kellen stepped onto the porch, and the boards complained under his weight. Near the threshold, he saw a smear on the doorframe, like a hand brushed it while entering. The smear was dark, but it could have been mud, and he could not tell from the angle. Kellen pushed the door wider with his glove, then leaned inside without fully crossing the threshold. The air smelled old, like damp paper and stale smoke, but it was not the sharp stink of a new fire. Light slipped through cracks in the boards, and dust floated in thin lines across the room. On the floor, a scatter of dry leaves formed a rough arrow pointing toward the back wall. His eyes adjusted, and he saw why locals might warn people away even without a ghost story. A narrow trapdoor sat near the hearth, and its edges were scraped clean, as if opened often. Next to it was a coil of nylon rope, pale and newer than anything else in the cabin. Kellen felt a cold pinch in his stomach, because rope did not belong in a forgotten structure. He backed out, set his tools down, and pulled his phone from his vest pocket. The service bar was still empty, but he could record what he saw for the supervisor later. He took photos of the prints, the rope, and the trapdoor, keeping each frame steady and clear. Then he tried calling again, and the call failed before it could ring. Kellen did not want to go under the cabin alone, and he knew that was a hard rule. Still, he could not stop thinking about the second set of prints that ended at the steps. He decided to do one more thing that stayed on the safe side of his job. He would check around the outside for a second exit, then leave and drive for signal. He walked the cabin perimeter, watching his footing on loose stones and roots. Behind the structure, a shallow trench ran along the foundation, filled with needles and old cans. Halfway down the back wall, the trench deepened and something metal glinted under dirt. Kellen crouched, brushed aside debris, and found a small square vent with a modern latch. The vent was nearly hidden, and it looked recently cleaned, which made it stand out. He did not open it, but he photographed it, then marked the spot in his phone notes. He typed short lines, cabin clearing, fresh prints, rope by trapdoor, vent with latch. He added the time, because details mattered when someone later asked what he had seen. By the time he returned to the gate, the quiet felt heavier than it should. Kellen loaded his tools, started the truck, and drove until his phone picked up a weak bar. He called his supervisor, then the regional ranger office, and he left a careful message. He said there were signs of activity at an abandoned cabin, and he was not going back alone. An hour later, a ranger named Sloane Maris met him at the gate with a second vehicle. Sloane was in her 40s, practical, and tired in the way of people who cover too much territory. She listened without interrupting, then asked for the photos and Kellen's exact walking route. Kellen handed over the phone, and she studied the prints and rope with a tight jaw. Sloane said the cabin was outside the official park map, but it still sat on public land. She also said locals called it the Long Cedar Place, and complaints came in every few months. Most reports were bonfires, dumped furniture, and teens daring each other to stay overnight. She did not mention ghosts, and her tone made it clear she did not want that part. They walked back together, and Kellen felt better with another set of footsteps beside his own. At the clearing, Sloane took her own photos, then measured the prints with a small ruler card. She pointed out that the deep heel marks suggested someone carrying weight going in. Then she paused at the steps, and she made a quiet sound, like a breath caught. There were two sets of prints now, and one set overlapped Kellen's earlier path. The newer set was lighter, and it came from the opposite edge of the clearing. It went to the porch, then turned and vanished near the front door, just like the other set. Sloane stared at the ground, then looked up at the trees as if expecting movement. She told Kellen to stay back, and she drew her radio even though the signal was poor. She tried the channel anyway, then switched to a second frequency and got only static. Kellen watched her shoulders tense, and he knew she was thinking about someone still inside. She stepped onto the porch, called out, and got the same silence Kellen had heard. Sloane did not go straight to the trap door, and that choice surprised Kellen. Instead, she moved to the side wall, then crouched near a warped window frame. She slid a small camera wand through a gap, and her face tightened as she watched the screen. Kellen could not see the display, but he saw her swallow, then pull the camera back slowly. She said there was a second door inside, not an exterior door, but a door that should not exist. She said it looked like it led into the wall, and the edges looked recently painted. Kellen blinked, because paint in that cabin would be like a bright flag in a swamp. Sloane told him to keep his distance, then she stepped into the cabin at last. Kellen stayed on the porch, angled so he could see the doorway and still watch the clearing. Inside, Sloane moved with careful steps, and the cabin groaned under her boots. He heard her say, "Ranger office. Identify yourself if you're here." Then he heard a faint click, like a latch turning, followed by a low drag across wood. Sloane backed out fast, and her expression had changed from caution to certainty. She said, "Someone is in there, and they have a way out you don't see." She told Kellen to return to the gate and wait, but he did not want to leave her alone. Sloane considered him for a moment, then told him to watch the tree line and stay silent. They held their positions for several minutes, and the only sound was wind through needles. Kellen's eyes kept returning to the boot prints that ended without a return path. He tried to picture how a person could step onto the porch and then disappear. Then he noticed something he had missed earlier, a thin line in the dirt beside the steps. The line was straight, like the track of something dragged, and it ran toward the side of the cabin. Kellen pointed it out, and Sloane nodded without taking her eyes off the doorway. She whispered, "That's a cover being pulled. Pross it." She moved along the porch edge, then dropped to one knee near the foundation. Near the porch corner, she found a plywood panel sunk into the ground like a loose hatch. Its top was dusted with dirt, but the corners were clean, like hands had lifted it often. Sloane used her knife to pry it, then held still, listening before she raised it fully. A cold draft rose from the opening, carrying the damp smell of soil and old concrete. Sloane kept her voice level and loud, and she called down into the dark. She said, "This is a ranger. Come up slowly and show your hands." For a few seconds, nothing happened, and Kellen felt his pulse thump in his ears. Then a voice answered, shaky and young, "Please, don't let him come back." A teenage boy climbed out, maybe 16, thin, covered in dust, and shaking hard. He looked at Kellen like he was trying to decide if he was real. Sloane guided him away from the hatch, then asked where the other person was. The boy swallowed, then said, "He's inside, and he locks the wall door." Sloane moved fast after that, and she told Kellen to stay with the boy. Kellen sat the kid on a rock and gave him water from his bottle. The boy held it with both hands, and his fingers would not stop trembling. He said his name was Rafi, and he had been working odd jobs with a man from a nearby town. Rafi said the man promised cash for hauling scrap out of the cabin and cleaning the clearing. Rafi also said the man called it a storage place, and he acted like he owned it. When Rafi asked why the cabin was not on any map, the man told him not to worry. Then, the first time Rafi saw the trapdoor, he realized it was not just a cabin. Rafi said there was a basement room under the cabin, with shelves and sealed plastic tubs. He said there were old tools, canned food, and stacks of papers wrapped in trash bags. He also said there were cameras, not new ones, but working ones with a small monitor. The man watched that monitor, and he told Rafi the cabin was safer than anywhere else. Kellen asked, "Safer from what?" Rafi looked toward the cabin, then lowered his voice like the trees could listen. He said people used to come here to hide, and they never left clean. He added that locals warned about it, because strangers always seemed to vanish around it. Kellen did not want to push a frightened kid, but the details sounded too organized for trespassing. He asked how Rafi got out, and Rafi pointed to the hatch under the porch. He said the man showed it once, bragging about how nobody could follow footprints. He said there was a tunnel that ran into the hillside, then split behind a false wall inside. While they talked, Sloane returned, breathing hard, and she looked like she had seen enough. She said the cabin was rigged with simple alarms, fishing line, and bells in the dust. She said the wall door led to a narrow corridor, and it was built with newer lumber. The corridor ended at the vent Kellen found, and it opened into a shallow ravine under brush. Sloane said the man was gone, and the only sign was a fresh scrape in the corridor dust. She called for backup again, and this time the radio caught a weak signal. She gave coordinates in plain language and asked for deputies and a medic for the kid. Then she told Kellen they needed to document everything before weather or animals erased it. They did it step by step, slow enough to be boring, because boring kept mistakes away. Sloane recorded a short video on her body camera, narrating each feature they found. Kellen took still photos with timestamps, then saved copies to a separate work folder. They photographed the rope, the trapdoor, the false wall seam, and the hidden hatch track. Sloane asked Rafi to describe the basement, and she wrote it down word for word. She asked about the papers, the tubs, and the cameras, and whether any names appeared. Rafi said the papers had dates, mostly older, like 1980-something and 2002. He said there were maps with circles and receipts from hardware stores and burner phones without service. He also said he saw a stack of cassette tapes in a milk crate, all labeled with weekdays. Sloane took that seriously, because tapes meant recordings, and recordings meant evidence. She and Kellen entered together, and they kept their hands visible on camera the whole time. In the basement, they found the shelves Rafi described, and the monitor that still had a faint glow. The tubs were real, and the tapes were real, and the labels were written in careful block letters. They did not play the tapes there because they had to preserve the chain of custody. Still, Sloane photographed each label, and Kellen read them quietly as if they were fragile. Monday check-in, Tuesday check-in, Wednesday check-in, and so on, over and over. At the bottom of the crate was a single tape labeled Visitors with no date at all. There was also a binder, thick, with plastic sleeves holding printed pages. Kellen saw a page that looked like a call log, with times and short notes beside numbers. He saw phrases like gate open, truck passed, and lights in clearing, written without emotion. Sloan flipped to another page and found a list of names, but none were full names. They were nicknames like Skiff, Halo, and Brick, and each had a dollar amount beside it. Sloan said, "This is not a dare cabin." Kellen nodded, and he felt his mouth go dry as he looked at the tidy shelves. It felt like someone had been running a business, and the cabin was just the front. Rafi kept saying the man watched people, and those tapes made that claim feel more believable. When deputies finally arrived, the clearing filled with engines and voices, and the spell broke. Sloan briefed them, then handed over the tape crate and binder with careful signatures. A medic checked Rafi, and he did not have visible injuries beyond scrapes and dehydration. Rafi said he had been down there only overnight, but he thought it had been longer. Over the next week, Kellen got pulled into interviews and paperwork he never expected. He met with a county investigator who asked him to walk through every minute of his morning. He provided his photos, his notes, and his call attempts, and he signed statements twice. He also learned from Sloan that the cabin had a real history, and it was uglier than rumors. Reportedly, the cabin had belonged to a private hunting club decades earlier, then burned partially and was rebuilt. After that, it became a meeting spot for all kinds of people who wanted to avoid attention. An archive clerk found old complaints about shouting and headlights in the clearing dating back to 1996. There were also missing property reports, like tools and bikes, that clustered around the same months. The warnings locals gave were not supernatural, and they were not just about trespassing. They were about a place that made it easy to disappear for a night, or a week, or longer. The tunnel explained the missing footprints, and the false wall explained the vanishing act. What surprised everyone was how long the setup had lasted, and how calmly it was maintained. The twist came from the tapes, once they were reviewed in a controlled lab. According to the investigator, several tapes captured short conversations, not confessions, but transactions and threats. One tape, the visitor's tape, included a voice that matched a former county contractor. That contractor had worked on culverts and drainage years earlier, and he had access to equipment and permits. The case tightened when purchase records matched lumber and vent hardware to a job billed as erosion control. The hidden vent was installed under cover of that work, and it blended into real maintenance. It meant the cabin was not just an accident of history, it was updated with official-looking paperwork. That was why it stayed off radar, because it hid behind normal processes and boring invoices. Kellen kept thinking about the moment he saw the prints that did not return. He realized the warning was never about the cabin itself, it was about the system around it. A place can be rotten and still look ordinary, especially when someone keeps it swept. When he drove past the gate later, the clearing was empty again, and the cabin was finally boarded up. Rafi was placed with relatives, and his statement became a small hinge in a bigger investigation. Sloan kept her tone steady whenever Kellen asked how it ended, because cases like that rarely end clean. She did say the main suspect vanished before arrest, and that alone kept the locals uneasy. Still, the tunnel was sealed, the tapes were secured, and the cabin stopped being useful. Months later, Kellen replaced the signpost again, because weather never stops doing its own work. He stood at the edge of the clearing and listened to the ordinary forest sounds. The cabin looked smaller with boards across every opening, like a mouth forced shut. Kellen understood why people warned others for years, even if they never knew the exact reason. He walked back to his truck, and he did not glance over his shoulder this time. Some places earn their reputation the slow way, through patterns people notice without proof. This one earned it through careful planning and through a hidden door that erased footsteps. And for once, the warning finally matched the truth, even if the truth arrived late. The stories. You can't outrun winter on that mountain road. The dispatcher log said the call lasted 47 seconds, and then the line went dead without a word. By dawn, a county plow driver found the truck door open, the engine warm, and nobody in the seat. On a Monday in late January, Lark Tolland woke before sunrise in a rental cabin above a ski town. He was 36, and he worked as a claims field investigator for a regional insurance company. His job was simple: on paper, verify damage, take photos, and write reports that could survive court. That morning, he planned to inspect a fender bender and be back in town before the next storm. The road down the mountain was narrow and shaded, with old pines that kept the snow from melting. A blinking sign near the first switchback warned about whiteouts and sudden closures in winter weather. Lark had seen signs like that everywhere, but this one looked freshly bent, like someone hit it hard. He slowed anyway, because the sky had that pale look that meant snow could start at any moment. The claim file on his passenger seat was thin, almost too thin to justify the drive. A delivery van had allegedly slid into a guardrail 2 nights earlier, then limped to a turnout. The driver reported minor injuries and a dented quarter panel, then asked for a quick settlement. The location was vague, described only as mile marker 27, near a scenic overlook. He reached the overlook and found something that did not match a minor accident report. The guardrail was scraped clean of paint, and the snowbank behind it was packed with broken glass. A few feet away, a second set of tire tracks cut off the shoulder and dipped into the trees. Those tracks had been dusted over, but the grooves still showed through like bruises under skin. Lark parked, stepped out, and felt the cold clamp on his lungs in a way that stole patience. He took wide shots first, then moved closer, keeping his boots on the packed snow for traction. The glass pieces were green and thick, more like an older truck window than a modern van pane. He also saw a torn strip of reflective tape, the kind that came on utility trucks. He used a small ruler for scale and photographed everything, then recorded a quick voice memo. The timestamp on his phone read 9:14, and he noted the wind was picking up fast. He tried calling the number on the claim, but it went straight to voicemail without ringing. The mailbox greeting was generic, and it ended with a click that sounded oddly clipped. Back in the cab, he opened the claim photos the driver had submitted. They showed a clean dent, no shattered window, and no guardrail scrape that deep. The van in the pictures also had no reflective tape, and its plate was never visible. Lark felt the small itch of a file that was built to be paid quickly. He drove a short loop to find the mile marker again because the road numbers rarely lined up. Near a bend, he spotted a maintenance gate and a service road leading into the trees. A fresh powder layer covered it, but a faint pair of tracks ran straight through the snow. They looked like a heavier vehicle, wide stance, and deep tread pattern. He turned onto the service road slowly, keeping his tires in the grooves to avoid getting stuck. The trees closed in, and the temperature dropped like he crossed an invisible line. After a quarter mile, he found a shallow ditch and a broken branch sprayed with dried mud. That mud was dark and gritty, like it came from a lower elevation where the ground was exposed. A few yards beyond the ditch, something metallic flashed under the snow. Lark knelt and brushed it clear with his glove, then froze when he saw what it was. It was a small radio microphone, the kind clipped to a uniform with a torn cord end. The push button was cracked, and the backplate had a number etched into it. He did not pocket it, because he had learned what that could look like later. He photographed it from every angle, then used a clean bag from his kit to cover it. He set a bright survey flag beside it so he could return with someone official. Then he walked back to the truck, feeling the snow start to sting his cheeks. At the overlook again, a state trooper cruiser sat angled across the turnout. The trooper was a stocky man with tired eyes, and his name tag read Kincaid. He looked at Lark's company badge and asked why he was off the main road. Lark explained the claim, then mentioned the reflective tape and the radio microphone. Kincaid's face changed at the word microphone, like a door quietly closing. He asked Lark to wait, then spoke into his own radio with careful, clipped phrases. When he returned, he told Lark the area was restricted due to a missing person report. He did not give details, but his jaw tightened when the wind gusted. Lark offered to show his photos, and Kincaid hesitated before nodding once. Inside the cruiser, Lark scrolled through the images, pointing out the glass and tape. Kincaid stared at the green glass, then at the guardrail scrape, and swallowed hard. He asked if Lark had found anything else, and Lark mentioned the service road tracks. Kincaid told him to stay put, then drove off toward the service gate without lights. Lark watched the cruiser disappear, and the quiet that followed felt deliberate. A few minutes later, Lark's phone buzzed with an unknown number calling him again. He answered, and a man's voice said, "Turn around and go back to town." The voice was calm, almost bored, and it did not sound like law enforcement. Lark asked who it was, and the line went dead with the same clipped click. He called back, but the number did not connect, like it was never real. He sat still, hands on the wheel, listening to the wind push snow across the glass. He could have left, and nobody would blame him for staying in his lane. Instead, he opened the claim file again, looking for anything he had missed. The driver name was written as Holden Rusk, but the signature was a rough block scrawl. The listed employer was a courier firm, yet the policyholder was a private individual. He checked the vehicle identification number recorded in the report. It was missing a digit, and the typed font looked copied from another document. Lark felt a cold certainty settle in, because small mistakes like that were never accidents. Someone had wanted the file to move fast, and they had not expected a field visit. Snow began to fall in thicker flakes, and the sky flattened into a dull white ceiling. Lark decided to head to the sheriff's substation in town because the trooper had left him alone. On the way down, the road narrowed further, and the wind started to shove the truck sideways. He kept both hands tight, and he drove slow enough that impatience could not tempt him. Halfway down, he saw a pair of headlights in his mirror, closing the distance too quickly. A dark pickup rode his bumper, then flashed high beams twice like an impatient warning. Lark pulled to the right where he could, but the pickup did not pass. It stayed behind him, keeping the same tight gap like it was hurting him. At a wide bend, the pickup finally swung around, spraying slush onto his windshield. As it passed, Lark caught a glimpse of a ladder rack and a stripe of reflective tape. The tape was torn, with a jagged edge that matched the piece he photographed at the overlook. The pickup did not speed away. It slowed ahead, forcing Lark to brake. Lark's pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept the wheel straight and his eyes forward. He reached for his phone and started recording audio, keeping it low by his thigh. The pickup drifted toward the center line, blocking him from passing safely. Then its brake lights flared, and the truck came to a near stop in the snow. Lark honked once, and the sound died in the storm like it was swallowed. A door opened on the pickup, and a figure stepped out wearing a dark coat and a hood. The figure raised a hand, not waving, more like signaling him to stay where he was. Lark shifted into reverse slowly, because panic made bad decisions feel like good ones. The pickup's figure walked toward him, boots crunching, head lowered against the wind. Lark kept backing, inches at a time, watching the road edge in his side mirror. His tires started to slip on the packed snow, and the engine strained. He stopped reversing, because another foot would put him into the ditch. The figure reached his driver door and tapped the window with 2 knuckles. Lark did not roll it down, and he did not unlock the door. He held up his badge through the glass and said, "I'm going to the sheriff right now." The figure leaned close, and Lark saw a beard and a pale scar under one eye. The man said, "You don't want to be out here when the road closes." His voice was the same calm voice from the phone, and it carried like he was unbothered. Lark said, "Move your truck, or I'm calling this in as a threat." The man smiled once, and it looked practiced. Then he stepped back. He walked to the pickup and climbed in, and the truck rolled forward again. Lark followed at a safer distance, keeping the audio recording running. The pickup took the next turnout suddenly, then vanished into the trees. Lark did not follow, because the lesson was clear. Someone knew exactly where he was. In town, the sheriff's substation was warm and smelled like coffee and wet wool. A deputy with a tired face took his statement, then asked him to wait in the lobby. After 10 minutes, Sheriff Rel Marston came out, coat still dusted with snow. He was in his late 50s, and his eyes looked like they had missed too much sleep. Marston introduced himself and listened without interrupting, hands folded behind his back. Lark showed the photos, the claim file, and the audio clip of the bearded man's warning. Marston nodded slowly, then asked if Lark had shared the microphone find with anyone else. Lark said he only told Trooper Kincaid, and Marston's mouth tightened at the name. Marston stepped into an office and made 2 calls, speaking low and careful. When he returned, he said a plow operator had reported an abandoned utility truck up the mountain. The operator said the door was open, the engine was warm, and a radio mic was missing. That matched Lark's find, and it matched the green glass scattered near the guardrail. Marston said the missing person was a county road technician, last seen checking a sensor array. Lark asked why a road technician would be connected to an insurance claim. Marston replied that it might be a distraction, or it might be a way to move a vehicle quietly. He said dispatch had received a strange call the previous night from a payphone near the mountain lodge. The caller reported a crash location, then hung up before answering any follow-up questions. The report was logged, but the storm had delayed a response until morning. Marston asked Lark to forward the claim documents, and Lark did it from his email app. Then Marston asked for the unknown number that called him, and Lark gave it. A deputy ran it through their system, and it returned as an unassigned routing number. Marston said that could happen with certain internet calling tools, and his face stayed flat. By afternoon, the storm thickened, and the mountain road closed behind the plows. Lark stayed in town, because leaving would mean returning to the same road in worse weather. Marston offered him a spare desk, and Lark spent hours comparing times and photos. He zoomed in on the claim images, looking for reflections, signage, and anything that anchored location. In one picture, he noticed a faint sign edge behind the van, showing a shape of a pine logo. That logo matched the ski area, not the overlook, and the snowbanks were shaped differently. The van photos had been taken in a plowed lot, not on a mountain shoulder. It meant the crash never happened where the claim said it did. Lark pointed it out, and Marston asked his deputy to pull traffic camera footage from the town entrance. The footage was grainy, but it showed a dark pickup with a ladder rack entering town 2 nights earlier. It also showed a utility truck following behind, then turning toward the mountain road after midnight. 20 minutes later, the same pickup came back alone, moving fast and wobbling like it was overloaded. Marston stared at the screen and said, "That utility truck never came back down." The next day, weather cleared just enough for a search team to go up with snowmobiles. Lark went along as a civilian witness, staying behind the deputies and marked vehicles. Near the service gate, they found the ditch and the broken branch, just like Lark described. They also found drag marks leading downhill, as if something heavy had been pulled on a tarp. The marks ended near a culvert where the snow hit a dark opening under the road. A deputy shined a light inside, and the beam caught a flash of reflective tape. They crawled in carefully and found the missing county utility truck wedged at an angle. The windshield was shattered, and the passenger window was gone, matching the green glass outside. There was no body in the cab, but there was a flashlight, a notebook, and a torn jacket sleeve. The notebook was damp but readable, and it looked like field notes. It listed sensor readings and timestamps, and then a final line that made Marston go quiet. The last entry said, "Saw an unmarked truck by the sensor box, driver wearing a fake badge." It ended with the words, "Call dispatch now," and then the ink smeared like the pen slipped. Marston said the technician had likely interrupted a theft because those sensor boxes used copper wiring. Copper theft was common, and crews sometimes got targeted because they worked alone at odd hours. But the fake badge detail changed things because it suggested planning, not opportunistic stealing. Lark asked about Trooper Kincaid, and Marston hesitated before answering. Marston said Kincaid was on administrative leave pending an internal review. He said a witness had reported seeing a cruiser near the service road around the time of the crash. That witness also described the trooper speaking with a bearded man by a pickup with a ladder rack. Marston did not accuse anyone outright, but the tightness in his voice carried the implication. Back at the substation, Marston received a call from state investigators. They had traced the fake claim documents to a printer at a small office rental in a nearby city. The office had been rented under a false name, paid in cash, and emptied the day after the storm. But a trash bin behind the building held a crumpled page with a copied policy template. On that page was a scribbled note that matched the etched number on the radio microphone. The etched number turned out to be an inventory tag from the county road department. It meant someone had handled the microphone long enough to scratch it, then dropped it in the snow. Lark realized the microphone was not lost during the crash. It was removed on purpose. The person who called him had tried to push him off the mountain before he connected the pieces. The winter storm was not just weather, it was cover, and it arrived right on schedule. 2 weeks later, the technician was found alive in a remote hunting shed below the tree line. Reportedly, he had a concussion and frostbite, and he had been too confused to find the road. Searchers found him after a dog caught his scent near the creek, then led handlers uphill. He told investigators he remembered voices, a flashlight in his face, and someone saying, "No witnesses." He also remembered a radio crackle, then silence, as if the battery had been pulled. The case did not wrap neatly, and Lark never claimed it did. There were reports of arrests tied to theft rings, and there were rumors about internal misconduct. What stayed solid were the logs, the camera clips, and the small mismatches that started it all. A bent warning sign, glass the wrong color, and reflective tape that did not belong on a van. When Lark finally drove home, the mountain road was open and sunny, but he still gripped the wheel hard. He stopped once at the overlook and looked at the guardrail, now patched and repainted. It looked normal again, which was the point of winter. It erased the edges fast. But in his report, the photos stayed sharp, and the timestamps stayed honest. The stories. The most troubling cases of missing hikers. The case file was thin, but the silence around it was heavy. It started with a trail register page that ended mid-sentence, and nobody could explain why. In early October of 2017, Lyle Maris was 38 and worked as a county records clerk. He handled archived reports, public requests, and the boring paperwork that kept a small sheriff office afloat. That morning, he planned to scan old search logs, then get home before the first hard rain. He did not plan to reopen a missing hikers case that everyone acted allergic to. The request came in a plain envelope with no return address and a sticky note inside. The note asked for copies of 3 files, all tied to the same state forest trail system. It also included a date range, and it ended with one sentence that felt like a dare. Do not call it an accident until you read the audio. Lyle was used to weird mail, but this one carried details only staff should know. He pulled the files from the back room, and he noticed something immediately. Each folder had the same handwriting on the spine and a strip of tape over the label. The tape looked old, and it had been trimmed clean, like someone wanted it to look official. The first file was from late summer of 2011, involving 2-day hikers. They parked at a trailhead near a reservoir and never returned before dark. Search teams found their car, their lunches, and their jackets folded on the back seat. The report said there was no sign of foul play, but it also said the keys were missing. The second file was from 2013, involving a couple and their dog. Witness statements placed them on the main trail at noon, heading toward a fire lookout. The dog was found the next day, wet and shaking, with a leash still attached. The couple was never found, and the report ended with a single line about bad weather. The third file was newer, from late spring of 2015, involving a lone hiker. Her friends said she was careful, and she always texted when she hit a landmark. Her phone last pinged near an old service road, then went quiet like it had been turned off. Searchers found her pack under a downed log, and it was neatly zipped and dry. Lyle did not like the pattern, but he could not say why yet. None of the cases were famous, and they were not tied to any public scandal. Still, someone had blocked the labels, and someone wanted the audio. Lyle checked the file inventory, and he saw a line item called Field Recording Station Copy. The sheriff office kept old audio in a small evidence room, but access was logged. Lyle asked the evidence tech, a man named Bracken Rudd, 46, civilian specialist. Bracken said the tapes were real, and he looked annoyed that Lyle even knew about them. He said the recordings came from a volunteer search leader who carried a handheld radio. Then he added that the recordings were mostly wind and there was nothing helpful. Lyle asked if he could listen anyway, because the request specifically mentioned audio. Bracken shrugged, then signed the checkout in a slow and careful way. He handed Lyle a small digital file player with a single folder loaded onto it. The folder name matched the trail system, and it held 3 audio clips. Lyle listened at his desk with cheap headphones, trying to keep his face neutral. The first clip started with radio chatter, then a pause, then a clipped female voice. Copy. Team 2 is at marker 7. Hearing something ahead? Might be hikers. Then there was a low sound under the static, like a steady tone that wavered. The voice returned, quieter now, and it did not sound like she was joking. Someone is whistling. It is close, but I do not see anybody on the trail. A second voice replied from base, asking if she meant a bird call. She said no, and then the clip ended with a sharp click. The second clip was longer and worse because it included more than one witness. A man spoke first, and he was breathing hard, like he had been running uphill. Base, this is Ridge Team. We found the dog, no people. The dog keeps pulling north. Base asked for location, and he gave a marker number and a creek crossing. Then the same low tone appeared again, faint but constant, riding under every word. The man said, "Do you hear that? Tell me you hear that." Bass replied, "Negative. Copy your traffic. What is the sound on your end?" The man did not answer right away, and when he did, his voice had changed. "It is like a phone ringing, but not right. It is coming from the trees." Another voice joined in, a woman, and she sounded angry and scared at the same time. "Stop calling back. Whoever is doing it is moving. It keeps pacing us." Bass told them to regroup, and the clip ended with heavy footsteps and a curse. The third clip was from the 2015 case, and it started calm. A volunteer said they had found the pack and it looked staged, not dropped. Bass asked what he meant, and he said the pack was clean and centered on the log. Then the tone appeared again, louder this time, and it pulsed like a slow alarm. The volunteer lowered his voice, like he was afraid the radio itself could betray him. "Someone is answering our calls, not on the repeater. It is local, like line of sight." Bass asked who was answering, and the volunteer said he could not see them. He added one detail that made Lyle pause with his hand on the volume knob. "It is using her voice. It is using her exact voice." Bass demanded he repeat, and the volunteer said, "It is her. It is the missing hiker." Then a sound cut through the tone, a short laugh, and it was too clean to be wind. The clip ended right after, as if somebody had hit stop on purpose. Lyle sat back, and he felt his throat tighten in a way he could not explain. He had heard enough dispatch audio to know when something was off. Voices on radios can warp, but this sounded like a deliberate imitation. He checked the player, and he saw a note field attached to the third clip. The note was timestamped, and it said, "Do not release, causes copycat behavior." Lyle stared at it, because it did not sound like normal evidence language. He opened the case file again and looked for the author of the note. It was signed by a lieutenant who retired years ago, and who had a reputation for control. Lyle did what records clerks do when they get nervous. He went to the paper trail, because paper does not care about feelings. He pulled dispatch logs for the search days, and he compared timestamps to the clips. The audio did not match the official logs, not perfectly, not even close. In the 2011 case, the log showed no mention of whistling. In the 2013 case, the log listed routine updates and nothing unusual. In the 2015 case, the log said the pack was found, then it jumped ahead. The gap was 47 minutes, and the log had a generic entry that did not explain it. Lyle printed the pages, then walked them to the deputy captain, who oversaw records. The captain was named Odessa Train, 52, patrol supervisor, and she had seen everything. She read the pages, then listened to the clips with a stiff jaw. When she finished, she did not say it was fake, and she did not say it was real. She asked where Lyle got the player, and he said from evidence checkout. She asked who else had access, and he named Bracken and a few supervisors. Odessa told Lyle to stop working the case, but her tone was not angry. It sounded like caution, the kind that comes from knowing a door should stay shut. Lyle nodded, but he could not let it go after hearing the imitation claim. He asked Odessa one direct question, and he kept his voice low. "Did anybody ever find the source of that tone?" Odessa held his eyes for a moment, then said, "They said it was interference." That answer was not satisfying, because interference does not track across years like a fingerprint. Lyle went home with the envelope still on his desk, and he barely tasted dinner. That night, he searched old newspaper microfilm, because the internet did not hold local history. He found brief articles about each case, but they all shared one strange detail. Each article mentioned a ranger station hotline set up for tips. The number was printed, then removed in later editions, like it had been a mistake. Lyle checked the old phone list, and he found the number was still active. It rang to a recorded message that said the station was closed for the season. The next morning, Lyle arrived early and asked Bracken about the hotline number. Bracken stiffened, then said that number belonged to a radio patch line, not a public phone. He said it was used during searches to bridge handheld radios to dispatch when coverage failed. Lyle asked why a patch line had a public recording, and Bracken said he did not know. Lyle did not press harder, because Bracken looked like he wanted to end the conversation. Instead, Lyle called the number from his desk phone, then held his recorder near the speaker. The message played, and it sounded normal at first, like any bored announcement voice. Then, under the words, the low tone crept in, faint but present, like a shadow. Lyle stopped the recording, then replayed it, and the tone was still there. He called again, and the tone shifted slightly, like it was responding to the call. He did it a third time, and he heard a tiny click between phrases. It was the same click that ended the first clip from 2011. Lyle brought his recording to Odessa, and this time she did not tell him to stop. She told him to sit down, then she locked her office door. Odessa said there was something older than the three cases, and it was why people avoided them. She said a decade earlier, a volunteer had abused the patch system to prank search teams. According to witness statements, the volunteer used the patch to mimic lost hikers on radio. He did it to keep morale up and to test response time, and it went too far. A young deputy confronted him in the woods, and a fight happened near a ravine. The volunteer fell, and the deputy claimed it was an accident, and the file vanished. Odessa said the patch line was never fully decommissioned after that. It stayed because it was useful and because nobody wanted to admit the history. She said some supervisors treated it like a ghost story and others treated it like leverage. When new hikers went missing, the old prank story came back, like a stain that would not wash. Lyle asked if that explained the imitation voice in the 2015 audio. Odessa said it could, but only if somebody still had access and still wanted control. She said the most troubling part was not the tone or the voice. It was the way the official logs had been cleaned, as if someone edited reality after the fact. Together, they pulled the maintenance records for the patch system. They found work orders signed by the retired lieutenant years after his supposed retirement. The signatures matched his style, and the dates aligned with the 3 search periods. It looked like he kept his hands on the system, even after he stopped wearing a badge. Odessa contacted the county IT contractor who handled old radio gear, a man named Kellen Swope, 44. Kellen agreed to inspect the patch cabinet at the ranger station site. He found a hidden add-on board that allowed call forwarding and voice playback. It was not standard equipment, and it was installed cleanly, like someone knew what they were doing. Kellen also found a small memory card taped inside the cabinet. The card contained voice samples labeled with dates and trail marker numbers. Some samples were harmless, like volunteers calling in their positions. Others were short clips of hikers on the day they vanished, taken from tip line voicemails. That was the payoff nobody wanted, because it tied the missing hikers to a human choice. Someone had been collecting their voices, then using those voices during searches. It did not prove the same person caused the disappearances, and Odessa was careful about that. But it proved someone exploited the chaos, and someone wanted the searches to move a certain way. In one file, a witness had reported hearing a phone ring in the trees near a creek. The search team went toward the sound, and they left the main trail for almost an hour. In another file, a volunteer heard a voice call her name from a ravine, and she went alone. She later told investigators she felt embarrassed because it sounded like her missing friend. Those moments were the cracks, and someone had been pushing on them. Odessa opened an internal investigation, and the county prosecutor reviewed what they could prove. The retired lieutenant was questioned, and he denied installing anything. He said the card was planted, and he said the clips were taken out of context. No public arrest followed, at least not in a way the town could point to and feel satisfied. But the ranger station patch line was shut down, and the hotline number went dead. New policy required sealed logs and outside audits during every future search. The 3 cases remained unsolved because the woods do not offer clean answers. Still, the way the searches unfolded now had a more believable explanation. Lyle kept thinking about the envelope and the sticky note, and who sent it. He asked Odessa if she knew, and she said she had a strong guess. She believed it was a former volunteer, someone who felt guilty and wanted the truth on record. That person did not want credit and did not want to be seen as a snitch in a small county. Weeks later, Lyle returned the files to storage and retaped the labels properly. He did not do it to hide them, he did it to mark them as normal evidence again. Some cases become legends, and legends make people careless in the wrong ways. These cases were troubling because they showed how easy it is to steer a search. When hikers vanish, the first enemy is time, and the second enemy is confusion. A single false sound can move trained people off a trail and into wasted hours. The woods can be cruel on their own, but people can make them worse. That is why the most troubling cases are not always about what happened out there. The stories. These archived dispatch calls revealed proof. The audio sat in a plain folder, stamped with a date and a case number that never went anywhere. Years later, those archived dispatch calls finally showed what actually happened that night. Blaine Hargrove was 42, and he produced local radio stories for a small station in the Desert West. On a Monday morning in early spring, he drove to the county building to request old emergency recordings. He had a simple goal for the day. He wanted sound for a cautious piece about misfiled crash reports. The station had heard whispers for years. One incident near a highway turnout kept returning in complaints. The rumor was always the same: a late-night call, a single vehicle, then a sudden silence. Some locals said a teenager vanished. Others said the report was padded to hide a police mistake. Blaine never repeated those claims on air. He only said the file had gaps and missing pages. Dispatch archives were supposed to be routine, so he expected a quick copy and a polite goodbye. At the counter, a clerk named Lark Soria slid a form under the glass and kept her voice low. She looked about 30, and she worked records intake for public requests and internal routing. She told Blaine the recordings existed, but the index notes were strange and partly overwritten. Blaine asked what that meant, and she shrugged, like she did not want the answer either. Lark led him to a side desk with an old computer and a small speaker that crackled at low volume. She said the county had migrated systems twice, and some files survived only as stitched fragments. Blaine thanked her, then put on headphones and began listening with a producer's careful patience. The first minutes sounded normal, a dispatcher logging traffic stops and a stalled truck call. Then the incident started, with a man's voice cutting in, tense, short, and trying to stay calm. He said he was at a turnout by the mile marker sign and something was wrong with a parked car. The dispatcher asked for details, and the caller said the driver was slumped and not responding. Blaine expected the next line: send units, start medical, confirm location. But the recording shifted. A second dispatcher voice appeared, sharper, and it used a call sign Blaine did not recognize. It ordered a unit to break off, then told another unit to hold traffic and wait for a supervisor. The first dispatcher tried to speak, but the audio clipped like someone keyed a mic too close. Blaine rewound and listened again, and the same odd command landed in the same exact second. He paused the audio and stared at the screen, because it sounded like two channels merged poorly. Lark watched him from behind the counter, and her face tightened when she saw his expression. Blaine asked if the second dispatcher was real or if the system had a known echo problem. Lark said there should have been only one dispatcher on nights, and the roster showed a single name. Blaine kept listening, and the caller's voice returned, quieter now, as if he had moved closer. He said the car door was open, and there was a phone on the seat with the screen still lit. The dispatcher told him to step back, and he agreed, but his breathing stayed loud in the mic. Then a new sound came through, a brief metallic click, followed by a calm voice saying, "Cancel units." The cancel order did not sound like a field officer. It sounded like a desk voice with a practiced rhythm. Blaine felt his skin go cold because cancellations were supposed to include a reason and a unit number. Instead, the voice simply said the call was unfounded and told everyone to return to prior assignments. The original dispatcher protested, and the recording ended with a sharp tone and a cut to dead air. Blaine removed the headphones and asked Lark if the logbook matched what he had just heard. She opened a scanned report on her screen, and it showed a routine welfare check with no transport. The notes said the vehicle belonged to an out-of-town contractor, and it drove off before contact. Blaine asked if any unit ever arrived, and Lark said the unit number was blank in the entry. He requested the original dispatch log, and Lark told him those paper logs were stored off-site in boxes. She offered to file another request, and Blaine agreed, keeping his voice steady and professional. As he signed the form, he noticed her hands were trembling, like she had heard this story too. Lark said she could not access everything, but she could tell him where the boxes were indexed. That afternoon, Blaine returned to his station office and transferred the audio into editing software. He did not change the file, he only made a working copy and marked the timestamps carefully. He listened in full, then compared it to the written entry line by line, looking for simple explanations. A bad merge could explain overlap, but it could not explain the new dispatcher voice using a missing call sign. Blaine called a retired dispatcher he knew, a man named Hollis Gant, who taught radio basics at a community college. Hollis was 61, and he had worked nights for 2 decades before taking early retirement. Blaine played a short excerpt, and Hollis immediately asked where the second voice came from. He said it sounded like a console mic, not a portable radio, because of the clean compression and lack of wind noise. Blaine asked about the click, and Hollis said it sounded like a channel patch being opened and closed. He explained that old systems let supervisors override traffic, especially during officer safety incidents. Blaine asked if overrides were logged, and Hollis said they should be, unless someone bypassed the normal menu. He also said the voice cadence felt familiar, like someone who had trained others and used set phrases. Blaine made a plan that was simple: gather every source that could confirm who spoke and who listened. He requested the off-site paper logs, the unit assignment roster, and the maintenance notes for the dispatch console. He also tracked down the original caller, using the case number tied to the partial record index. The contact address was outdated, but a utility record pointed to a forwarding box in a coastal town. A week later, Blaine reached the caller by phone, and the man sounded older than expected. His name was Keir Lamb. He was 50, and he worked as a forklift mechanic for a shipping yard. Keir said he had avoided interviews for years because he felt stupid and scared about that night. He agreed to talk off the record first, as long as Blaine did not use his name on air. Keir said he had been driving home late, and he pulled into the turnout to make a quick call. He noticed a sedan with its driver door open, and a person inside who did not respond. He called emergency services from a flip phone, and he remembered the dispatcher voice clearly. He also remembered someone else talking over her, like a second person in the same room. Keir said he heard the cancel order, and it did not come through the phone speaker. He said it came from behind him, like someone standing near the turnout speaking into a handheld radio. Blaine asked if Keir saw anyone, and Keir said he saw a dark SUV with no light bar. It rolled in slow, stopped without headlights, and someone stepped out and told him to leave. Keir said the person was not in uniform, but he held a radio and spoke like he belonged there. He told Keir, "Go home. You didn't see anything, and you don't want trouble." Keir left because he believed him, and because his phone screen had gone dark as if the call dropped. He drove straight home, and he did not sleep, because he kept imagining the open car door in the wind. Blaine asked why Keir never filed a complaint, and Keir said he tried once, then got warned again. He said a man called his house the next day and knew details that were not in the public record. The man told him the county had it handled and said his job could get complicated if he kept talking. Keir said he had a kid at home then, and he chose silence, even though it still bothered him. Blaine compared Keir's memory to the audio again, and one detail stood out in a new way. The cancel voice sounded like it came through the dispatch system, but Keir remembered hearing it nearby. That meant someone on scene repeated the cancel order, or someone on scene caused it to happen. Blaine needed more than a feeling. He needed a solid chain from the console to the turnout. When the off-site boxes arrived, Lark called Blaine and told him to come in after lunch. She met him with a cart of binders and a warning. The pages smelled like smoke and old tape. Blaine thanked her, then began photographing entries with his phone, keeping the dates aligned. The log for that night included the initial call, but the next lines were torn out cleanly. The tier was too neat for age, like someone removed a strip on purpose and then filed the rest. Blaine asked Lark who handled archives back then, and she said a supervisor managed retention compliance. She gave Blaine a name that was public in old payroll records, a dispatch supervisor known for strict control. Blaine did not repeat the name in his notes. He wrote only supervisor and the year. Blaine requested the maintenance notes next, hoping they would show a console override or a repair ticket. The county replied with a short letter saying no relevant notes existed due to a purge policy. Blaine appealed the response and included dates and system model references from public purchasing records. 2 days later, a different clerk emailed a scan that had been missed, a single page with a service code. The page referenced a patch panel fault, and it listed a time within minutes of the turnout call. It also listed a technician sign-off, and the signature matched the supervisor's initials in the payroll files. Blaine showed the page to Hollis, and Hollis frowned and said that was not a technician's signature. He said it looked like a supervisor signing to close a ticket without an actual repair. Blaine now had three things that aligned: an overwritten index, torn log lines, and an odd console patch record. Still, none of it proved who issued the cancel order, and none of it proved why. He needed the one thing most people ignored: the background noise that rides under speech. So he took the working copy and asked an audio engineer at the station to run a clean analysis. The engineer, a woman named Tamsin Rowe, was 35 and had built her career restoring old interview tape. She listened with good headphones, then zoomed into the waveform around the metallic click. She said there was a second click under the first, offset by a fraction of a second. She explained it sounded like a desk foot switch, followed by a handheld transmit button. Tamsin also noticed something stranger: a low tone under the cancel voice that stayed constant. She said it sounded like an air conditioner fan, the kind found in small office rooms. Then, she compared it to the first dispatcher voice, and the fan tone was different and steadier. That suggested the cancel voice was recorded in a different room, then patched into the main channel. Blaine asked if that could happen, and Tamsin said yes, if someone used a training room console. Some centers had a second console for drills, and it could be patched into live traffic in emergencies. Blaine asked who had access, and Tamsin said supervisors and trainers usually had the keys. Blaine felt the story tightening because a trainer would know exactly how to sound calm on a bad night. He returned to the county building and asked Lark one careful question: did the dispatch center have a training console then? Lark hesitated, then said the old floor plan showed a side room labeled instruction booth. She said it was removed during renovations, but it existed in that era and shared wiring with the main floor. Blaine asked if the booth had its own mic, and she said yes, and it had a direct patch switch. Blaine still did not have the motive, and he did not want to guess at it. So he looked at what else happened that night, and he found something buried in unrelated paperwork. A property sheet showed a large cash seizure from a traffic stop logged into the evidence room at midnight. The next morning, the cash was reported short, and the report blamed a counting error and got closed. Blaine lined up the times, and the turnout call landed right between the evidence log and the cash discrepancy report. He asked Hollis if a fake emergency could pull units off the road, and Hollis said it was a classic trick. A welfare check at a turnout would draw patrol, and it would also distract dispatch from monitoring internal doors. If someone needed 5 minutes alone, a sudden call and a sudden cancel could make that window. Blaine called Keir again and asked about the dark SUV, and Keir described it in more detail. He said it had a State Fleet plate and a small antenna cluster like a communications vehicle. He said the driver who spoke to him wore a plain jacket, but carried himself like a supervisor. Keir also said the sedan in the turnout was not in bad shape. It looked staged, like it had been parked carefully. Blaine realized the proof was not just in what the dispatch calls said, it was in what they avoided saying. No one ever confirmed a unit arrival, no one ever logged a plate check, and no one asked for medical priority. The call was designed to be started and stopped quickly, without the normal steps that create paper trails. That meant the person controlling it knew policy, and knew exactly which parts to skip. Blaine requested one more thing: the building entry logs for the dispatch center on that night. The county said those logs did not exist anymore, but a facilities contractor had kept backups for billing disputes. After more calls, Blaine obtained a scanned badge report that showed door activity after midnight. It showed the supervisor badge opening the training booth door, then the evidence room hallway door minutes later. Blaine sat with Tamsin and Hollis and listened to the key moments again, with the badge report in hand. They played the click, the cancel voice, and the sharp cut to dead air. Hollis said the cut sounded like a manual stop, not a system end, because the tail tone was missing. Tamsin said the handheld click matched a portable radio nearby, which fit Keir hearing a voice behind him. Blaine had to be careful, because proof can still be misunderstood if the story gets rushed. He wrote a timeline using only documents, audio artifacts, and witness statements that could be verified. He removed names, and he removed any detail that could point to private people who had done nothing wrong. He focused on the method: a staged call, a training booth patch, a rapid cancel, and a missing log strip. When Blaine returned to the county building to ask for comment, Lark met him with tired eyes. She said someone had called her office, asking why she kept helping a radio producer dig up old dirt. Blaine told her she did not need to do anything else and he could handle the rest on his own. Lark shook her head and said she had one more thing, because she was done pretending it was normal. She handed him a photocopy of an internal memo, filed as a training note but written like a warning. It instructed staff to route certain audio requests to supervision, and it referenced the turnout call by date. The memo used the phrase proof risk, and it ordered that no copies be made outside official review. Lark said she found it in a misfiled binder, and it had never been scanned into the public index. Blaine read the memo twice, then folded it and placed it in a plain envelope with his notes. The proof was not a confession, but it was a paper trail showing someone feared what the audio contained. He thanked Lark, and she asked one question. "Are you going to put this out there?" Blaine said he would, but he would do it carefully and only with what he could support. The final piece came from a place Blaine did not expect, a voicemail from an old number he had called weeks earlier. It was short and strained, and it sounded like a person trying to choose words that would not invite retaliation. The voice said the training booth patch switch was used that night, and it was used by someone with keys. The voice also said the sedan at the turnout belonged to a county pool, and it was checked out under a fake entry. Blaine saved the voicemail, then asked Tamsin to confirm it was not spliced or altered. Tamsin said it was clean, and she noted the same steady fan tone found under the cancel voice. That meant the voicemail speaker had likely been in the same small room and knew the sound of it. Blaine did not know who left the message, but the audio carried its own quiet fingerprint. When the story aired, Blaine kept the language careful and grounded because facts matter more than heat. He played the dispatch excerpt, then explained the torn log, the badge report, and the patch record. He included Keir's account without naming him, and he described the SUV in broad terms only. He never claimed a specific person stole anything, but he showed how the staged call created a perfect distraction. The county responded with a short statement, saying the matter was old and could not be confirmed. They did not deny the training booth existed, and they did not explain why the log strip was missing. Within days, a state auditor announced a review of evidence handling practices going back many years. Blaine did not celebrate, because the point was never drama. It was the shape of truth in the record. Weeks later, Blaine sat in his edit room and listened to the archived call one last time. He noticed how the original dispatcher sounded, like someone trying to do her job inside a sudden fog. He imagined the moment she realized a second voice had taken control, and she could not stop it. It was not supernatural. It was ordinary power, used quietly, and that made it worse. Blaine filed the raw audio, the memo copy, and his notes into the station archive with strict access rules. He labeled everything with dates in words, so future staff would not lose the trail in bad metadata. He also sent Keir a short message through the number he had, saying the story was finally out. Keir replied once, and only with relief, saying he could breathe easier now. The proof had been there all along, hiding in a click, a fan hum, and a missing strip of paper. It did not solve every question about the turnout, but it showed the call was never what it claimed. For Blaine, that was enough to matter, because it meant the record could still be corrected. And for anyone who still trusted the archive, it was a reminder that silence sometimes has fingerprints.